text-to-voice synthesis provided by Vidnami. About names, the real estate, franchise, and title system. January 5, 2021 by Anna von Reitz. In ancient times, all proper names were descriptions: Hector of Troy, Jeremiah the prophet, Illius of Alexandria, Merlin the Magician. In Celtic lands, names could take on many descriptive forms, and could denote the name of the clan, which itself includes many family names. Just take a look at the families attached to the Clan MacDonald. Each one of all those people could claim to be a MacDonald, but only one, the Clan Chieftain, could claim to be the MacDonald. A certain superstition was common about giving away your name, similar to the resistance of American Indians to being photographed. Many groups felt that a name was too precious and intimate to be shared with the public, so they adopted totem names. Queen Guinnivere means Queen Snow Owl, and King Arthur means King Bear. Still, all in all, these names are all descriptions, and not names used in the modern way. The Roman Empire had a vast and well-orchestrated system of nomenclature designed to not only identify individuals but also locate their origins and social status, but it gradually fell into disuse, until in most places in Europe it was a distant memory. In the Scandinavian countries, other conventions based on descriptive family relationships arose, as in, Olaf, Sven's son, becoming Olaf Svensson. Wherever the Roman Catholic Church established beachheads, the names of church members were recorded as part of the church's responsibilities for keeping track of baptisms, marriages, death rites, and so on. Their location did not have to be part of the name in most cases, because the church parish described the location of most of the names being recorded. Exceptions were bridegrooms, brides, and other visitors or immigrants from other parishes who occasionally were born or died outside their home parish. Additionally, the ancient custom of adopting Christian names was practiced, by which someone given the name, Marjorie Brown, was transformed into Sister Plotzidia, or a man named Raymond Stuckbuilder, felt a particular closeness to Saint Peter and changed his name to Peter Stuckbuilder, with the blessings and recordkeeping of the Church. These sorts of Christian name changes are still an accepted part of Church tradition. Beginning with the Norman conquest, governments again began serious cataloging and recording the identities and location of subjects, whether nobles, free men, or serfs. For administrative purposes, the names were still descriptive in nature, but additional effort was made to nail down the individual identity of each bit of property belonging to the monarch for purposes of conscription, tax allotments, census records, and so on. 600 years later, naming conventions had taken on distinctly more secular purposes. Not only did the monarchs of Europe need to keep track of their subjects in terms of name and location for administrative purposes, they needed to catalogue the work and wares of their able subjects. By the early 1700s, circuit riders were sent into every town and village to assign names to the inhabitants. It is from this era that many occupation-related names arose. John, the blacksmith, became John Black or John Smith. Adam, the bookie who gave odds on horse races, became Adam Horseman or Adam Bookie, and so on. Names like baker, forester, plowman, carpenter, and hunter derive from this era. Still later, these trade names would be recognized as trademarks. The ownership of names has always been problematic. The monarchs, in their infinite megalomania, claimed that they owned their subjects and the names of their subjects, and when the trade names were assigned, they also assumed ownership of the trademarks, meaning the surnames and signatures of their subjects. So, for example, if a man named Simon Kingman, a British subject, signed his own name to a promissory note, the King or Queen of England technically became liable for his debt, which meant that he became liable for his every enterprise to the monarch, and all his business enterprises belonged to the monarch, who held his name and all his property assets in trust and under his name, of course, and the monarch could, at any time, require him to pay his debts in full. Thus began the incursion of the royal estate, otherwise known as real estate, into the realms of private identity and private business and private enterprise in Europe. In America, these practices and assumptions were foisted off onto the colonists, too, but once independence was secured, ownership of our own given names and/or any trade names or pen names or performer names vested fully in each one of us, and the only ones who continued to be part of the real estate system were British territorial citizens. The British claim of custodial interest in every British subject regardless of where they live also means that Brits living in America can't own land, because all interest in land or other property vests in their Queen, acting as their trustee, whether they like it or not, and everything they own or create is also the Queen's. To make this theft of a man's name, trademarks, and other property legal, though it can never be lawful, the Queen agrees to protect his property interests from threat offered by anyone other than herself and her many, many agents and bill collectors. She also agrees to provide certain social benefits in exchange for his donation of himself and all his property to serve as collateral backing the Queen's debts. Sound familiar? It should. This is how a British subject's surname, like Black or Beecham, is converted first into a trade name trademark and then invested as part of the real estate, and the individual name, like Simon or Mark or Mildred, is interpreted as the name of an individual franchise exercising the trademark. Additionally, if a Brit accepts any form of government service, he or she is given a title, typically, Mr., or Miss, or Mrs., or Doctor, or Captain, that further identifies them as a servant or slave or otherwise a debtor of Her Royal Majesty. And now you see how incredibly profitable it has been for the Brits to come over here and pretend, accidentally on purpose, that all these American babies were poor waifs, abandoned, on the Civil War battlefield, of unknown origin, given up by their purportedly unwed mothers or turned in like lost baggage by passing strangers acting as informants, ripe for their taking and inclusion as part of the real estate, franchise, and title system. Most Brits were victimized in this same way and never told a word about it, and they are just as confused by all the semantic deceit and commercial claims as we have been. But now that all this bourgeois is delved out and spread squirming on the ground for all to see, it's apparent that 1. The Queen has not kept her coronation vows to the people of the Great Britain, but has instead willfully digressed into a very different and predatory role, and 2. Millions upon millions of Americans have been grossly mischaracterized, deliberately misidentified, and defrauded in breach of trust. Most of us aren't Brits and never were and never want to be, plus, we already had this argument twice. What force of arms could not deliver, guile cannot provide. Possession by pirates does not change ownership. Now some poor scared and confused people have come to me, concerned that they might be fooled again, and wondering about the use of middle names. Middle names were not generally used until the later half of the 19th century, when the government's administrative endeavors were becoming bogged down with too many people having the same or very similar names. The middle name convention was adopted to help sort things out between Robert Joe Black, Robert John Black, Robert Jason Black, and so on. Most United States presidents, oddly including Ulysses S. Grant, didn't have middle names or middle initials. Grant's actual name was simply Hiram Grant. He lived his entire career from West Point onward through the war and the presidency and everything else under an assumed name, and in his case, a nom de guerre. In truth, Grant didn't have a middle name, either, simply an S, that didn't stand for anything more than an S. Perhaps someone relished the joke of having a president called U.S. Grant, as in, Grant of the United States. Anyway, old Hiram Grant was the golden boy and the fall guy for all that went on during his administration and ever since, and having or not having a middle name was not the crux of it. The crux appropriate, the cross of it is, do you own and control your own name and trademarks as an American, or do you, voluntarily, adopt the status of a British territorial subject, living and working in this country as a U.S. citizen? Now that you know how the Queen actually operates this spider web of deceit and false claims and overbearing ruthless opportunism against her own people, do you want to be part of that? Never able to own your own home and land, always under the thumb of the Queen and the Crown. Hounded by British thugs akin to the Raj in India, helpless to control your own government? Think about it, but don't think too long. Claim back your good name and standing as a birthright American. Correct the falsified record that your misdirected public employees created, for you, claiming that you were abandoned property, and latching you as a baby in the name of the British monarch. At the same time these jackals were receiving our aid against the Nazis and everything from shoelaces to firebricks needed to rebuild their own country and economy. The ink wasn't dry on the Nazi surrender and the gallows hadn't creaked under the feet of the prisoners at Nuremberg before the Brits were planning our economic and diplomatic defeat. This is the treachery that Britain and its leadership, in league with the Roman pontiff, are famous for, and a right ruddy example of the criminality which has infested the British Islands and the monarchy ever since the days of King John. Britain is indeed great, but only because of the greatness of her common people, the toughness, veracity, work ethic, enterprise and wit of average people living throughout these haunted islands, and that is a greatness that has been heartlessly preyed upon by 6 generations of German supplanters under the control of the House of Wettin. Just as these same supplanters substituted their state of state organizations for our American state of state organizations after the Civil War, just as they substituted their version of the United States for the United States, just as they substituted their version of the United States of America and even the United States of America, Incorporated, for our Federation of States, they have done the same thing every place they have ever taken root, and all to the same end, to act as deceivers and parasites and then move on, killing their hosts or leaving them debilitated as they go. They set up Germany, they set up France, they set up Britain, twice. Now they have set up America and pretended that we are, the US, and are trying their best to sink us with their bunco, while they move on to China and sink their fangs into a billion Chinese backs. This all deserves to end, not with more lies and warplanes, but with determined men and women devoted to the cause of justice and life, finally seeing the perpetrators of all the misery, all the lies, and arresting them as the criminals they are. We need to finally cut to the chase, see through and beyond all the stooges and storefronts set up to be the fall guys and scapegoats, straight through to the ancient evil that these criminals have cherished. And give them nowhere to hide.